Story 1. Haunted house gets demolished. I lived at 308 West McIntyre. Grew up there until I was 18. Since before I was born, stuff would happen there. Doorknobs would violently turn like someone was trying to open the door. Loud footsteps upstairs when no one else was home, to sounds of moving furniture upstairs. My brother was obsessed with playing with the Ouija board. He would speak to someone named Ames William. One day he wrecked his car, and the board said it was his doing. Doors would open and close on their own. One time, I was eating all alone in the kitchen while my cousins and sisters were playing Monopoly upstairs. All of a sudden, I hear 3 loud knocks on the window in the bedroom closest to the kitchen. I freaked out and ran upstairs, but they brushed it off and told me it was probably the wind. So I went back downstairs and sat on the counter to eat because my sister refused to let me eat in her room. Then again, 3 loud knocks, but this time on our back door. I ran so fast back upstairs. My sister and cousins checked outside and no one was there. Another time, my sister was crying, sitting on the toilet because the ankle she sprained was hurting and something kept pulling her hair back. So many things happened growing up in that house. Other things were like hearing my name being called from upstairs that would sound like my sister or my mom. And I'd run up there like, "What do you want?" And no one would be there. Before I was born, one night my brother, sister, and cousin were playing pillow football inside the house, and all of a sudden, my cousin froze in shock. She claimed to see a lady in a polka-dyed dress, translucent, standing on the stairs, then disappeared through the wall. We sold it. They knocked it down, covered the pool, and, well, now there just sit some apartments in its place. I still have nightmares. The house next door, which still resides there, also left us so uneasy. It was my aunt's house, and my grandpa died in that home. You'd wake up in the middle of the night because a TV was blaring white noise. Would also see shadows in dark rooms. You'd be showering and the sink water would turn on, or the lights would shut off on their own. One time a pencil flew straight out of the closet, right at my cousin's face while she was laying on the bed. Since the house still sits there, I'm so tempted to go there. But the thought makes me so nervous. Literally, my heart starts racing. Story 2. My Louisiana ghost story. Alone overnight in a haunted house. "No, it's not haunted," the housekeeper reassured me. "Oh, there are stories, but nobody's ever seen anything." She paused. "I've never seen anything." In an unnamed house, in an unnamed town, I met a ghost. We were never introduced properly. In fact, the housekeeper denied any and all ghosts the minute I walked in. "It's not haunted. At least I've never seen anything," she announced as she led me through the grand entryway and into a hallway dressed up with fall flower arrangements. The century-old house was massive, one huge square room after another, and each one decorated with antique parlor furniture, large potted plants, heavy framed mirrors and paintings, and crystal chandeliers that hung like glowing upside-down wedding dresses. It was a beautiful southern mansion that, like so many in Louisiana, now functioned as a luxurious bed and breakfast. The housekeeper showed me my suite for the night. It had a tremendous king-size bed, smothered in a pile of pillows and more white lace and satin than a royal christening. "You'll be staying alone in the house," the housekeeper added. "There are no other guests tonight." As long as you say it's not haunted, I joked. No, it's not haunted, she reassured me. Oh, there are stories, but nobody's ever seen anything. She paused. I've never seen anything. I asked her to tell me more about the stories, and out of the housekeeper's mouth tumbled one grade A Southern ghost story. Apparently, the Cajun family who had once owned the house reported seeing a ghost of a little girl who, when she was alive, used to get locked up in the wooden closet under the stairs. Trapped in the dark, she would scream and kick against the door, a habit that she carried on into the next life. Despite closing that door every night, the Cajun family would always find it open in the morning. Eventually, they began leaving toys inside the closet at night to appease the unhappy little ghost. Last year, we had a Halloween party in the house. Guess what my costume was? She was suddenly cheerful again. I was dressed up as the little girl from under the stairs. I think I could have handled just about anything. If the housekeeper had told me that someone had hanged himself in the foyer, or that the mansion was under some swamp curse, or that it was built on top of some old French cemetery. But no. Instead, she was describing a bothered little girl ghost trapped in a closet with an armful of old-fashioned toys. Now that was creepy. Oh, you're gonna hear things tonight. You will, she laughed nervously. And then she left. I was now in the house alone. It was evening. A few lights had been left on in some of the rooms, and I did not feel the need to start walking around the huge house to turn them off. Instead, I made my way to the first floor bedroom and then into the bathroom, where I changed for bed and brushed my teeth. That's when I felt it, that dreadful sensation of being watched. I felt coldness on the back of my neck, and my spine tingled. I stared at my face in the mirror, but there was nothing else there. No apparitions or vague reflections. I left the room and then shut the glass panel bathroom door, certain that I was simply scaring myself. I sat down at the table, opened my laptop, and began answering emails. It was 11:15, and the glow from my computer pulled me away from any fears and kept me focused on the mundane realities of our digital lives. A pair of feet shuffled across the bathroom floor. I turned towards the door I had just closed. It was still closed, the only entrance into that room. The noise repeated itself. A pair of feet shuffling across the floor, then stopping right at the other side of the bathroom door. My fingers froze on the keyboard, and I tried to think rationally. My mind went through all the things that might be making the noise. Someone else entering the house, some very large wild animal scurrying about. But no, those had been feet pattering along the floor. That's when I crawled into the giant bed and took up my defensive position, armed pitifully with my cell phone and a laptop. At midnight, I heard a loud thump upstairs, then another, followed by another. Soon, there was a clatter all about, dull thuds, a few bangs, followed by the sound of someone walking around on the second floor. I remained frozen in my bed, tweeting my terror out into the great digital cloud. There are strange noises coming from upstairs. Yes, I was terrified. I hadn't taken the housekeeper seriously, and now it was nearly midnight, and I was stuck in a giant bed in a giant mansion that suddenly had come alive with strange noises. No, they were not simply old house noises that old houses make. That was no air conditioning or heat running. It was not simply the humid air turning cooler and the house settling back into its foundations, as many Twitter followers tried to explain to me. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of someone running down the stairs. whatever it was had joined me on the first floor. I stared at the bedroom door, then reverted to Facebook. I chatted with friends in different countries explaining my dilemma, that I was wide awake in a house that was most likely haunted by a traumatized little girl, and that honestly, this was the kind of adventure on which I'd be happy to take a pass. Eventually, the footsteps went back upstairs, and the clatter intensified. I wanted to laugh, but couldn't, as I read my Twitter friends arguing about the existence of ghosts. All the while, I was listening to what sounded like bowling balls rolling around on the floor above me and the doors slamming shut. Via social media, I began to get a flood of real-time advice on how to deal with my real-time haunting. Some said to confront the thing. Others said to call the police and report intruders. Some said to pray to St. Michael, and others said St. Joseph was better with this sort of thing. The Hindus in India said to burn incense. My friend, who's a nun, told me to leave the house immediately. Eventually, my body grew so tired that I laid down, wrapped up like a mummy in my blankets. The house became silent once more, and for several hours I listened to the quiet, still terrified but hopeful that the worst was over. All I had to do was make it until morning. I awoke at around 4 a.m. to the sound of crystal glasses clinking against crystal. Then somebody was stacking china. I thought of the Cajun family who had lived here, how they had appeased the ghost with toys. I had no toys to offer. The only thing I had in my handbag was a small harmonica that I had recently purchased. For a second I was relieved, as if I had something positive to offer the ghost. But then I realized that if I suddenly heard a harmonica playing in the darkness, I would probably die of cardiac arrest. And so I stayed in bed until morning, not sleeping and not moving. I waited until I heard the housekeeper arrive and begin preparing breakfast in the kitchen. Only then did I crawl out of bed. The housekeeper acted nonchalant. She gave me some food and chatted about the weather until I finally interrupted. I told her what had happened, all the different sounds that I had heard, and how I had been kept awake for most of the night. "You know, my son won't even set foot in this house," she confessed. "He'll come to the door, but won't ever cross into it." As a teenager, he played with the owner's son inside the house and had one creepy experience that he still won't discuss. And that has kept him away ever since. The housekeeper also told me about her little niece talking alone upstairs, chatting with some unseen friend. And yet she would never admit that she had any proof of anything. She needed the house not to be haunted, which made sense to me. If I worked all day in a big, old southern mansion, I would not want it to be haunted either. Story 3. Escaping the Madman's Hellish Dungeon. This is a difficult story to share as it involves my uncle's evil legacy, which was brought to a head many years ago. I never met him, but when I was a teenager, my mother told me that he'd committed suicide, and that was that. My father, who was his brother, died from cancer when I was only 3, and there were no other living relatives. Dad was the only one in my uncle's will, which left his house of horrors that was then passed on to my mother. Uncle Arthur's House of Horrors was called as such due to the horrifying murders he conducted before his death. He knew that the police were closing in when many young women went missing over a period of 15 years. After his death, the subsequent investigations and cleanup, Mom finally decided what to do with the property. By the time I was 21, there was a total refurbishment, and then she rented it out to several people. When I reached 30 years of age, I took over the dealings and had to answer many complaints about the building. The renters said they heard screams and saw ghastly apparitions. I never believed ghost stories and was a little annoyed with having to check the property at all times of the night. At this stage, Mom was quite ill herself, so I often went to the building alone, armed with a flashlight and my pistol. One night, at the beginning of autumn, I received yet another call from a new tenant who said she heard screams. Tired of the complaints, I felt that they were just knee-jerk reactions to the rumors and stories about the murders. I'd refused the suggestions to bring a priest or a medium in to perform a cleansing, so I went in to investigate myself. This time I decided to spend more time in the building, especially in the basement where no one liked to go. I told the woman to stay somewhere else for the night so I could check the premises out without any hindrance. Beginning with the second floor, I methodically swept through each room and did my best to keep my eyes peeled. I also kept my ears open and did hear many sounds, all of which I assumed could easily be explained using reason. When I heard the occasional moan, I attributed it to the plumbing and shifting of the old framework. At times I felt a blast of cold wind and assumed I needed to get the drafts and air conditioning checked. When I went to the first floor, I heard noises which sounded like screams, but I thought they were cats fighting. As I got to the top of the stairs which led down to the basement, I heard a distinct guttural growl from below. I have to admit, it did freak me out a little, but I convinced myself that it was probably creaking pipes or even the door. Switching the lights on, I noticed a strong odor of blood hitting my nostrils, but passed it off as rusty metals. When I walked down the stairs, I heard shuffling footsteps, which made me wonder if squatters were there. I called out angrily, "Who's down here?" But no one answered. So I kept moving to the bottom of the stairs. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up when a blood-curdling scream came from the far end of the basement. I turned my flashlight on, due to the fact that the lights didn't illuminate the whole area, but couldn't see anything. What made my flesh crawl was the growing sound of weeping and pleas for help. I couldn't explain them away. I kept yelling, "Who's there?" But all I heard was the crying and intermediate shuffling and occasional screams. Then I sensed a dark presence behind me, growling and chuckling. I spun around and nearly fainted when I saw that the basement was cluttered and filthy, like I was in another house. The screams were louder now as the lights flickered and a growling presence loomed large in the background. I walked past a large wall of boxes and crates to see a scene that might as well have been straight from a horror film. 3 young women were hanging from hooks in the ceiling, secured by their wrist and naked, dripping with blood. 2 of them seemed to be either dead or unconscious, while a younger blonde woman kicked and screamed. Her blood-soaked gag had dropped to her neck, and I saw several deep cuts in her chest and abdomen, still bleeding. Shaking uncontrollably, I blinked many times, trying to convince myself that I was dreaming, but it was all too real. Then I saw a scene behind the row of hanging women, where a long, steel table was being prepared by a big man. I didn't realize that I was still creeping towards the table as the man fiddled with shackles at each of the corners. He wore a black raincoat with a hood over his head, muttering and chuckling as he pulled out a hammer. I suddenly bumped into the table in shock, then screamed as he turned to face me. It was my Uncle Arthur. He gave me a vicious smile that soon morphed into a scowl as he cackled loudly like a maniac and pointed to me. He yelled,
"On the table now, little piggy."
I turned to run, but smacked into one of the hanging women. I felt the blood sticking to my face as I continued to scream, while my uncle's strong hands grabbed my shoulders. In a split second, he dragged me back and slammed me onto the table, then quickly shackled my ankles and wrist. He wrenched the flashlight from my hand and smashed it down on my forehead. I saw stars for quite a while. I felt blood trickle into my eye as many screams filled my ears, along with the howling coming from my uncle. It was like he thought he was an animal, howling at the moon, while he slammed the hammer all along the table. I felt the table shake as he continued to bring the hammer down, between my legs and other parts of the table. I couldn't believe it when I started to scream and plead.
Please, please, Uncle Arthur, it's me, Arthur. It's your nephew,
He was muttering again, saying incoherent things as he rummaged through the drawers of his workbench. He turned around with a saw in his hand, looking at me in a dazed and furious way. I thought I was going to die. There seemed to be 100 women screaming now as he brought the saw down roughly onto my neck. I could see his black-rimmed eyes as he leered at me, dribbling through rotten, gnashing teeth, growling like a beast. When the saw started tearing at my flesh, I screamed for the last time and passed out, with blood and tears mingling. It seemed like an eon before I woke up, flat on my back on the floor of the basement, which was now back to normal. I sat up and wondered if it was all a dream, but nothing stopped me from convincing my mom to sell the property.